Good evening and welcome to Martin's Drinks Club. Good evening and welcome to Martin's Drinks Club. I'm Paul, your host from Word Gets Around. Welcome to episode 2 of the series. Thank you for those that joined us last week where we learnt about the tools of the trade when it comes to the drinks trade and enjoyed a martini for the first time. Few technical issues tonight, as always is the way, a few gremlins in the system. So a few technical issues our end with the sound, but hopefully Martin is waiting in the wings, raring to go. First off, Martin achieved his first professional drinks qualification in 1973 and has continued to keep pace with industry developments ever since. He's been a professional wine and spirit educator since 1988, past Southwest chairman of the UK Bartenders Guild, and is passionate about quality drinks, including craft beers and ciders. Now a resident in Taunton, he is keen to share his knowledge and experience with local enthusiasts. First off, I'd like to thank Martin for his continued value that he offers to our magazine, Word Gets Around magazine here in Taunton. In a minute, we'll be introducing to Martin, see what he's up to and what the plan is for today, including making a cocktail this evening and also one that you can obviously make at home. Please feel free to comment as we go along. I'm monitoring all the questions tonight and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask Martin some questions. We're also talking about people will be able to make donations to a local charity, possibly Taunton Food Bank. We're still working through the mechanics of that. But thank you for joining us this evening. Martin, are you there? Martin, good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. How are you doing?
Wonderful. I'm great, thanks, Paul.
Excellent. I say we have a few technical issues. It's always the way, isn't it? There's never human error, obviously.
Absolutely.
One quick thing before we get started, Martin, I just wanted to mention, there we go, please hit the like button tonight. Please follow Martin's page. He posts lots of interesting things, don't you, Martin, onto your page on Facebook?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, he does lots of different cocktails and experience in the trade. So, Martin, all ready to go. What are we discussing tonight?
Well, what we're discussing tonight is really a continuation from last week. Last week we looked at how cocktails developed, and we used gin as the illustration. So this evening I'm going to show you how you can take out one ingredient and put a different one in and make a completely different drink. And then we'll do this each week with the classic cocktails, just gradually evolving the drink.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll leave it over to you, Martin. On with the show.
Okay. Well, last week we did a lot with gin. This week I'm concentrating on vodka because what you can do with gin is very easy to transfer to vodka. For some reason, the top of my head seems to be cut off. It wasn't before, I don't know why, but maybe Paul can do something about that. Now that's better. You can see all of me now. Okay, so we're going to talk about this drink called vodka. It was first recorded in the early 15th century, so it's been around a long time. But we didn't know about it in this country. It was in countries like Russia, Poland, and the Scandinavian countries, where it's very cold. And vodka is the first stage of the process, as I explained last week, to making gin. Both the products come out of the same still. I'm going to take this off for a moment. Can you hear me now? I'm getting a lot of echo from the phone because Paul's going to prompt me. So I'll leave the headphones there, but I'll talk without it because it's confusing me. Okay, so we're going back to the 15th century. We're talking about vodka. But as I say, we didn't really see it in this country. Now, the thing about vodka in its traditional form, it was completely neutral. They filtered out the flavour and the aroma so that it was a very neutral drink. Nowadays, a lot of flavours go into vodkas, gin being one of them, but originally it wasn't like that. So another common misconception is people don't realise you can make vodka from any fermentable material, and the fermentable material would depend on where you were. So if, for example, you were in Russia, you could distill vodka from grain, they had a lot of grain. If you're in Poland, they were distilling from potatoes. Now that's quite a complicated process from potato, because potatoes in its natural form is not fermentable like a grape or crushing wheat. So what you have to do, like barley, is you have to convert it into a fermentable material, and then you can distill that fermentable material. But that's why we get this great range of origins of different vodkas. Now, the only flavour that did creep in, particularly in Poland, was berries. So if there were cranberries in the area, you might find cranberries infused into the vodka, or blackberries, or whatever was the naturally going fruit, and particularly berries, in the area. Vodkas like lemon vodka are much more modern. They're really in the modern age, but we used to get the berries in Poland. If you go to a Polish restaurant or a Polish club, when I lived in Cambridge, there was a Polish club. They had a huge range of the most wonderful vodkas, which were infused with all different berry fruit flavours. Great fun working your way through them, but you wouldn't want to drive afterwards. And that's the other thing, they were often very strong. You can get in Poland something called Wysznik, which goes up to about 90% alcohol by volume. It's almost pure spirit. And my grandmother used to use it. She used to make a cherry brandy out of it by steeping Morello cherries and sugar within this very strong vodka. And as kids, we were allowed to eat a cherry, but the cherries were actually more alcoholic than the spirit that was derived from it, because it was soaked up all this wonderful spirit. So I had a love for it, certainly in those days. So what happened then in modern times? Well, we got more flavours, and the nature of the vodkas changed. So in my youth, there were some classics. There was, I'll come back to Smirnoff or Smirnoff, as it's pronounced in Russian, a little bit later, because the Smirnoff we have now, or Smirnoff, is now a global brand. The classic Russian vodkas, which you can still find today, are vodkas like Stolichnaya. I mean, that's a superb vodka. I have a vodka, if I can find what I've done with it, I'll put it to one side. Not to worry. Oh, here we are. I knew I'd had it. This is Russian Standard. You can see the label is still with a lot of Russian on it. This is a very traditional Russian vodka, and that I'm going to use next week. I'm not using that this week. I'm going to use a different vodka, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, in these countries, 40% is the minimum of vodka. If you go to Poland, they won't drink anything under 45%. I can tell you a story about that later. Vodkas that are very popular today, I'll come back now to Smirnoff or Smirnoff. When the Russian Revolution occurred, the Smirnoff family knew it was coming. It was a leading vodka of its day. It was Moscow distilled. They left Russia to escape the revolutionaries, and they settled, I believe it was in America, but they started to produce vodka in many parts of the world. I mean, we were producing Smirnoff in Harlow in Essex when I was in the trade. And as I say, it was produced in many different countries. I don't drink that brand now, and I mentioned this last week, and I don't drink Bacardi, and I don't drink Gordon's gin, particularly because I use them for cocktails, and they all reduce their strength to 37.5% in round about the late 70s, and it was purely to to save excise duty, which they didn't give back to the customer. They purely took it into profit, which the bar trade, the proper end of the bar trade in London, the cocktail bar trade, never forgave them for it either. And very few serious bartenders will use those brands for that reason. So we started then to get a multiplicity of brands in this country. I'm sure you all remember Vladivar, certainly those who've been around like me for a little bit longer, Vladivar from Warrington. And I remember going on a trade trip to Warrington where we had a dinner where there were bottles of vodka along the table, and we had toasts, and the toasts, there must have been 40 odd toasts, and you had to drink a shot of vodka with each toast. So you actually got pretty merry very quickly. It was quite irresponsible, and I don't believe that would happen today. But traditionally, people in Russia and Poland did used to drink a fair amount of vodka. I once went to a Polish wedding, not dissimilar experience. So we got Vladivar. The company I worked for, Hedges and Butler, produced a brand called Zamoyski, which was based on a Polish family of that name. Count Zamoyski actually lived in London and belonged to the Polish club. And I was sent to the Polish club with a sample bottle of our wonderful vodka with their crests and everything, which we paid for the rights for, to see whether the club would stop Zamoyski vodka, because their Count Zamoyski was a member there. And they said, come into the bar, and they gave me one of their vodkas, and they said, Martin, this is 45%. We don't drink anything less than 45%. And I was trying to sell them a 37.5% vodka. But they were very nice to me, and they treated me to lunch, and they explained about what true Polish vodka was all about. So I learned a lot from that experience. What we're going to do now, yes, I've mentioned the brands. I will mention some of the brand leaders today, because the quality of vodka produced in countries other than the traditional Russia, Poland, Sweden, Finland, all these countries. See, we began to get some major brands at the top end of the market. Grey Goose, which comes from France. A wonderful vodka called Ciroc. Now, Ciroc is made in Bordeaux. It's distilled from grapes. It's a very nice vodka. So there's Ciroc. There's Ketel One, Ketel, Ketel One, which comes from the Netherlands. Now, that, for many professional bartenders, is the preferred brand. It's much less expensive than Grey Goose, but it's perceived to be an absolutely perfect vodka for making cocktails. And here in England, I think you all know Chase. Now, very interesting story. Simon Chase used to be a potato farmer. And one day, Tesco sent back a whole container of potatoes because they were the wrong shape. He hit the roof, cost them a lot of money. So he made a decision that day never to sell to supermarkets ever again. And the first thing he did was make crisps, Tyrrells, which they sold off for a lot of money, many millions, because they were superb crisps. Never sold to supermarkets, only to independents and the hospitality industry. And they invested all the money in a distillery. And I remember Simon Chase saying at the time that this was for the long term, that they never expected to get a real return on it in their lifetimes. It was something they wanted to do. Chase was using potatoes as the base for their vodka. Makes a lot of sense. Polish style vodka. And their vodka is superb. So much so that just a few weeks ago, in spite of what Simon said in those early days, they sold out to Diageo for many, many millions of pounds. It was a huge amount of money. The big companies no longer bother with market development. What they do is they find small companies who've made all the running, and they make them an offer they can't refuse. And that's how these really good quality niche brands are bought by multinationals. It's a trend. A lot of people in the trade dislike it, but I'm afraid that's commercial life. So that's talking about vodka and some of the top brands. Now, I just want to talk about the cocktail I'm going to make this week, because you're probably getting a little bit thirsty. Now, last week, I talked about Tanqueray gin. It's a classic gin, very heavily based on juniper berries. And in that ilk, you've got brands like Beefeater, which are very similar. These are old style, traditional brands that have been going for a very long time, almost since the origin of gin in this country. So I'm now going to talk about vodka, because the same cocktail that we made last week, the Martini, which is actually quite an old cocktail. It goes back really to the last century, or even the century before that. We're talking about in the 1900s, Martini was around. It grew out of a cocktail called the Martinez, which I will make for you the week after next. So I'm trying to show how all these drinks evolved. But vodka was not particularly well known in the UK, except as a mass market drink, vodka and lemonade and these sorts of drinks. There wasn't a lot of call for it in the bars. Gin is actually much more interesting, but then there were people who didn't like gin. So let's talk about the vodka martini. Well, it's believed it came about in about 1951. Vodka started to be used for cocktails back in probably 1933 or thereabouts. It grew out of Prohibition. We're talking about Americans who, during the Prohibition years, of course, everything went underground. We had the speakeasies. There was a lot of illicit drinking. So when vodka came onto the market in the States, it became very popular. But as I say, it wasn't known here. Now, remember that Smirnoff was a brand which was produced in the United States, and cocktails were much bigger there at the time than they were here, because, as I say, in the probably 50s, 60s, cocktails were dying out in the UK completely. And I talked about that last week. So this is an American cocktail. Now, what do the Americans like about their drinks? They like them ice cold, much colder than we do. So I told you that for a martini, particularly for a gin martini, it should be stirred, not shaken. Now we're going to go into this next week, because next week I'm going to show you the most famous cocktail in the modern age, I think, the Vesper Martini, which came out of the film Casino Royale. And if you remember, I told you that Ian Fleming, who wrote the books, and the films came out of the books, Ian Fleming knew about cocktails. So the one we're going to make next week is based on gin and vodka. So last week we talked about a gin martini. This week we're going to talk about a vodka martini. Next week we're going to bring the two together and make a Vesper Martini. And there's a particular ingredient in it which is different to most cocktails, which I won't trouble you with now. But watch out next week for the discussion on the vermouth, because this is really exciting. This week we're going to use exactly the same vermouth as last week, the Noy Pra, an absolute classic. Now, the vodka is never specified for what is called a vodka-tini. I believe as long as you use a 40% vodka, you shouldn't be getting a lot of difference in the taste. The great thing about vodka is texture. And if you take a vodka from the time of the James Bond books, you could still get Stolichnaya at 50% alcohol by volume. Now it's 40%. So these really high strength vodkas largely disappeared from the market. And just to talk about vodka for a second, I mentioned that one, the Russian Standard, which I will save for next week, because I think if we're talking about James Bond, a Russian vodka is highly appropriate. Now this is another Russian vodka, and you may perceive it's in the shape of a mammoth tusk, and that's why it's called Mamont. And this vodka, it's a bit more expensive than the vodka we're going to taste this evening. This is early 30s for a bottle, about £32. This comes from Siberia, And in Siberia, we've got very, very pure water from the ice. And that vodka is distilled in Siberia, or at least the water comes from Siberia. I'm not 100% sure where they actually distill it, but certainly that's the source of the water. So a very interesting product. But I'm not going to use that this evening because I've tried it. I don't think it makes a great deal of difference. I want to use a vodka this evening called Finlandia. And as you may perceive from the name, it comes from Finland. Now, if you go to Finland, they wouldn't recognize this because this identical vodka is sold under a Finnish brand name. But when they wanted to export it globally, nobody would understand it. So they called it Finlandia in a very pretty bottle. And I remember when it first came out, the company I worked for had the marketing rights to this in the UK. And they had the most spectacular glasses. They were like frosted glasses, which sadly I have no more. But the kit that came with it and the bottle was all, as I say, it looked like frosting. It was an amazing bottle. Sadly, they produce it in a more simple bottle these days. So we'll use Finlandia vodka. And we're going to use the same vermouth as last week. Now, last week I made a dry martini. And I used, for me, 50 millilitres of gin, and I used 10 millilitres of the vermouth. And that's already a dry martini. It's almost bone dry, but it's got a little bit of sweetness from the vermouth. The vodkatini, if you go by Simon Difford's recipe, that's Simon Difford's book. I mentioned that last week. I don't know whether you can see that on the screen. That book has 3,000 cocktails in it and came out this year. And if you look on my Facebook page, I've given you full details of where you can get it. It's an excellent reference book. It's got pictures of every cocktail. So I'm going to use his basic recipe. You'll find that the spirit that he recommends depends on the sponsor, because that's how he funds the book. The book is, for this huge tome, is £28. It actually costs more than that, but then they get massive sponsorship from the drinks brands. So I'm going to use this evening this. Finlandia. The first thing we did last week, before we started to do anything, we thought about our garnish and got that out of the way. Here's one I prepared earlier. You can use a lemon twist, as I used last week, but because we used the lemon twist last week, I thought this evening, just for fun, we'd use the olive, which is the alternative. And if you recall, the first thing I've said, we have to chill down our glass. And what we do, if you're at home on your own, you can do it with your hands. I mean, the ice does tend to stick. To chill a glass down quickly, you just put the ice cubes in the glass. Well, this particular glass takes about 5 or 6 cubes. I'll put 5 in. So, as I told you last week, and I didn't use water last week, but I said I will in future be using water. If you pour the water on the ice and leave it, that will chill down very quickly. It will chill down with the ice. We saw that last week, but it just takes a lot longer. You can put your glasses in the fridge or even the freezer. They do in professional bars. I lack space, and also I don't want to risk breaking my glasses. All the glasses that I use for myself are good glasses. I like crystal glass, and I like the glass to be thin. If you go in a pub and have a cocktail, for me the sensation isn't the same, because they tend to use much thicker rims and machine-made glasses, and I don't get the same pleasure. I think drinking out of a nice glass is part of the experience. So we've done the 2 bits of prep. We've got our olive ready, and we've chilled down our glass. You also remember that I talked about the measure. Now, this is the new measure that Simon Difford produced just a few weeks ago. It's online at £8. I've got no particular axe to grind for Simon Difford, although I respect him. He's a great writer on cocktails, but this has changed the world for me. as I said last week, we either use the conventional jigger, which is a standard measure which you pour into your shaker or your mixing glass, but it's very hard to judge exactly how much you're using because most of them aren't graduated at all. So you get a 50 ml measure and you've got to guess what's half. Now, a barman that's been doing this for the last 20 years, he knows. He probably doesn't even need the measure. And on the continent, a lot of people just use the eye. It's what they call free pour. I never do because I'm not that good. I mean, I would say I'm a good amateur cocktail maker, but I don't consider I'm a professional. I have professional product knowledge, but I've never worked behind a bar. It wasn't my scene. Taught barman, and I haven't actually worked behind the bar. So I find that very useful because inside it's got measures right down to 5 milliliters, and you can see the quantity so much more clearly because of the shape of the measure. So I love this measure. And the other thing is shaken, not stirred. Now in the James Bond book, he talks of James Bond asks for it specifically to be shaken, not stirred. Now if you hadn't asked for it shaken, not stirred, the barman would almost certainly have stirred the cocktail. And when we're using gin, we always stir it, not shake it. There are lots of reasons for this. People talk about bruising the gin because you're shaking it too hard. We're getting far too much liquid in there because the ice melts. And the other problem is we get tiny little flakes of ice. However, you'll get your cocktail much colder more quickly in the shaker. And I spoke to you last week about the mixing glass, and you don't have to have a mixing glass. When you need to use one, you could use half of the shaker. We're going to use the Boston shaker this evening. That's another type of shaker that I briefly mentioned last week. This is one that I love to use. It chills down the drink very quickly, which is less dilution. And I've got used to taking it apart and putting it back together again. But it's much more expensive. It's a designer shaker. I love using it. I like the feel of it. It's brushed brass. And it's got stainless steel inside. I like to use it. But tonight, I'm going to use exactly what you should be using when you're starting, a Boston shaker. It's inexpensive and it's the safest to use because you can price it apart so easily. Now, I'm this evening going to use a higher quantity of spirit than I normally use because we're going to shake it, so we're going to get more dilution. I'm using a slightly larger cocktail glass than many of the ones I've got because there's a reasonable quantity in this, because we're going to use 75 milliliters of alcohol. Now, if you think a measure in this country is 25 mil, this is a triple measure. Next week, when we talk about the Vodka Martini, that's a very strong cocktail. And he would have been using 50% gin as well, or 50% vodka. We'll be using 40% next week, but I'm not going to talk about that now. Let's stick to this. We're going to use 75 milliliters of vodka, but 7.5 mil of vermouth. In other words, the vermouth is only 10% of the vodka. It's basically a vodka drink with a hint of the vermouth. And there are a lot of people who like vodka cocktails. Now, I'm going to measure this. I will put that's 45 mil. So I'll put the 45 mil in. Then I'll put 30 mil in because my measure only goes up. That's it. That's the amount. My measure only goes up to 60, which is standard for those measures. So I can't show you the whole pour in one go. So we put our vodka in there. We now take our vermouth and we want 30 ml of vermouth. Now I can see that 30 ml is there. It looks almost as much as the vodka, but you've got to remember the shape of the glass, because the higher up you go, the wider the diameter. It doesn't look a lot more, but in fact you're using a lot more as you use the top section. So that's actually half of the shaker, of the measure. That and that are identical, but it's nice and easy to pour. So that's all we do. Now we put the ice in, lots of ice in. You won't dilute it anymore if you put more ice in. In fact, you'll use less, because the more ice there is, the colder it gets, and the slower it is to melt. As I say, if I'm making this just for myself, I often just use my hands. Right, okay. Not done as professionally as I'd like, but it'll do. Okay, now, Boston shaker. I showed you what I would do, but I didn't actually do it. Now, the thing about a Boston shaker, you just give it a tap, and that's now sealed. That shouldn't come off. Now, if you're shaking with friends, in the same way as if you were shaking with a bar, be very careful who's around, because if you've got this wrong and it suddenly flies out your hand, you don't want to hit somebody with it. So I've put that in, and I'm going to shake this very hard. Now I can feel, as I shake, the outside of the shaker getting really, really cold. And you need to shake it to wake it, as my bartender Mike says to me. Shake it to wake it. And you shake it more for a vodka martini than you would for other drinks, because it's got to be very, very cold. That's the way the Americans like it. And all you have to do is tap it, and it breaks the vacuum. And there we are, that's gone. Now, just to show you, last week I talked about strainers. That was the first kind of strainer. That's called a julep strainer. We hardly use that today, but if you're making a mint julep, which was again a drink in the southern states of America, great drink in the summer, that's a julep strainer. This is the strainer that we use most of the time. This is a Hawthorne strainer. And as I said, it came with the whole cocktail kit for about £20. Which I bought for the gin festivals I was doing at the time to demonstrate a cheap and easy mix. So that's what we're going to use this evening, but we're also going to use this. Now, very important when we've shaken in the shaker this particular drink, because all these little ice flecks are in there. So it will make the drink cloudy, and it's unpleasant really to have all these little bits in the glass. So the glass is chilled down. I normally do this when I start. But what I want you to see, that's now completely frosted. And that's very, very important. Let's just shake the water out. Now the next thing is, we're going to strain this, and you can see this strainer will go into any shape, cocktail shaker or mixing glass or whatever, because it's got a spring in there, and it's very clever. And it was named, I think, after the person who invented it. His name was Hawthorne. And that, we go in there. Now, I don't think you can see that, but I can see lots of flecks of ice in there. If you were using lemon or orange or some other fruit, again, it will filter out the fruit. Now, we could use a bit of lemon zest in there. I actually prefer it with lemon, but this evening I'm going to put an olive in, because that's the other classic. And if I drink this, it's ice cold. It's very refreshing. But for me personally, I think it lacks something, because, as I say, vodka has very little flavour, even today. You don't, unless you buy flavoured vodka. Now, I have read that lemon vodka is a nicer drink, and then you would serve some lemon zest with it. But quite frankly, if I'm making a martini, personally, I enjoy gin-based martinis. I'm going to make the combination next week, which you'll find interesting. Then I'll go back a stage and show you the Martinez, which is a sweet-based martini effectively, and was all the rage before martinis were invented, when they went on to dry gin as opposed to sweeter gin. And then as the next few weeks go on and after Christmas, I will show you some much more modern interpretations. The aviation cocktail, there are lots and lots of wonderful cocktails, the Negroni, the nuclear daiquiri, nuclear daiquiri is actually rum, but the red light Negroni, which is amazing, which uses a Dutch gin. But all that's for the future. But this evening we've gone back a stage now. I learned when I first started my wine courses back in the early 70s, it's not what I like. I learned and was taught to judge what is good of its type, because people out there may like what I don't. I'll give you an example. Kahlua, which is which makes a cocktail very famous called the Espresso Martini. We will make it. I made one the other evening and I hated it. And I hated it because Kahlua is intensely sweet, not to my taste, but it's a very popular cocktail, and the classic was made with Kahlua for a lady who liked sweet cocktails. When I was in Sri Lanka and I was a judge, a lot of the cocktails there for me were too sweet. Now, if there's balance with the sweetness, so you've got lemon juice with very sweet drinks, for example, you've got the acidity to balance it out, it's not nearly so bad. But I don't like very sweet cocktails. Other people do. So it's not for me to tell you what you like. I just want to show you what the options are. So there we are. That is the Vodka Martini. And this is about as basic as you can get in terms of flavour. You've got the hit of alcohol. Remember, in the earlier days, a cocktail bartender may have been using Scottish Nair at 50%, but I don't find that on the market now. So basically 40% vodka is what you get. And if you shake it a lot, as I've done to get it cold, you get a lot of dilution as well, which is why you use 75 millilitres rather than the lesser amount. We normally use 50 ml of spirit in a drink. So this is deceptively strong. You can't pick up that alcohol the time it's blended with the water, but it's still there. So after a triple measure, you shouldn't be driving afterwards. And I just make that point. Well, thank you very much. I'm back to Paul. I'm going to put the headphones on, then I can hear Paul more clearly, because unfortunately his voice wasn't coming through the screen as it was last week. Paul, over to you.
Well, Martin, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
I can hear you perfectly now.
Really enjoyed that. Excellent. Glad you can hear me. I have some nice people joining us tonight. A few comments. If anybody's got any questions for Martin, then please ask them, and I can put them forward to him. Martin, I've had some bad experiences with vodka in the past, but I think it was I struggled with 37.5%. So anything stronger than that, I think it was more quantity over quality. I just wanted to ask you about the filtration of vodka when it's made, because there's a lot, obviously, the cheaper the vodka, the less filtration goes on, and the worse the headache you get. Is that right?
Not really. You might think so, but the reason vodka is colourless, flavourless and odourless is the huge amount of filtration it gets through charcoal. The cheaper vodkas just are very boring. You mix them with other drinks, maybe not alcoholic, but you're mixing them with things that make them sweet. But having said all that, they just don't do anything for me. Now, if you take a really good vodka, take a Polish vodka and put it in the freezer. I mean, I've done it with the Mammoth, the same happens. You will get the most wonderful texture. It goes very rich in terms of mouthfeel. And these traditional vodkas were generally drunk on their own. They weren't intended to be made into cocktails. So that's really where modern development has changed. Only a handful of people would tend to drink vodka neat. I enjoy the experience. They certainly say that with caviar, vodka is a fantastic match, but it has to be ice cold.
Excellent. Along those lines, you said about the vodka. Bethan's made an interesting point here. When she was at primary school, there was a Russian family. The parents would have a shot of vodka every morning with breakfast,
Mm.
and the weekend the kids would have one too. So always a popular sleepover venue at
I
that
bet it
particular
was.
house. But I guess it's a big part of the Russian culture, isn't it? And Polish culture to drink it neat.
They drink it neat and they drink vast quantities. My first experience was when I was at college, and that was, what, 50 years ago. And one of my college friends had a family wedding in Bedford, big Polish community in Bedford. There was also in Cambridge, where I lived. And when they have a celebration, there are bottles of vodka all down the table. And when the vodka runs out, they put more vodka on. So they're drinking it with the meal, but they're drinking tumblers. They're drinking it out of glasses like this. They're big glasses. And when I went to this thing at Vladimir in Warrington, it was absolutely horrendous, the amount of vodka they poured down our throats. Dangerous stuff. You could, but then they're used to it.
Yeah, so you build up the tolerance. It becomes a part of your daily life, doesn't it? Really, part of the
I
culture.
don't I don't recommend drinking large quantities of any alcohol. I'm
No.
all about quality rather than quantity.
Excellent. I was just thinking because obviously December's just around the corner, and lots of people place their drinks orders. I just wondered what's kind of on your drinks list when it comes to Christmas when you're stocking up.
Very good question, Paul. Very good indeed. I've indulged myself a bit more in the variety of what I bought this year. I have bought myself more wine. I've ordered from the Wine Society, I've ordered from a company called Yap in Wiltshire, and I've ordered wine from Waitrose online. And the reason I've done this is because they've got their strengths in particular areas. And I like very dry Alsace wines, which is why I go to Yaps. And the wines, I'm never drinking on it on their own. I drink wine with food and I like a variety. I've ordered from Augustus for this weekend to have food to eat at home. And by the way, announcement of the day, they are going to continue the take-home service even once they open the restaurant, which is great news because you don't have to pay a service charge and you don't have to buy wine at their restaurant prices. So I have a discussion with the manager every time that I buy my food. We discuss what wine is best because he comes from France and we have a lovely discussion. So they're having a lamb dish this weekend, but it's lamb Provençal. And Provençal has many more things. If you're just eating a joint of lamb, Bordeaux's the obvious wine. But if it comes from Provençal, you want a Rhone wine or Provence wine or Languedoc, you want something more alcoholic and probably less fine, but with the breadth of flavour. So that's my wines. My spirits, I have just bought myself as a treat a bottle of my favourite whiskey, which I haven't had for years. It's Lagavulin 16-year-old. It's a very powerful Islay malt, which I love. But it was on a Black Friday offer at under £50, and that's normally well over 60. So I've treated myself. So that's what I'm doing. I shall be making some cocktails, but drinking great wines with food, and I will have some really nice spirits to drink on their own. That's rum, that's whiskey. Those are the sorts of drinks I have, and maybe a little Armagnac. These sorts of things I drink over the Christmas period.
So, well, my wife Sarah is very keen on the old snowball at that time of
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
usually
very traditional.
Yeah, I'm usually on dark rums. My preferred some usually Kraken or Lamb's Navy rum.
Yeah,
Lamb's Navy
yeah.
rum is a personal preference of mine. A bit different, particularly the dark rum cocktails I like. And yeah, we're just stocking up at the moment. So as you say, you've got a good deal there on the Black Friday offer. A point you made, obviously today, Somerset's well, where we are, Somerset West and Taunton area, are going to be in tier 2. Apologies, tier
Mm-hmm.
2 during the lockdown. So there's still those restrictions. And you mentioned Augustus as one example, but it's that we really need to support our independent traders, the people that are able to deliver locally. It's something you're particularly passionate about, as am I.
Well, there are a couple of wine retailers who have some serious wines. One I like very much is run by Hugh in Bath Place. He's got some lovely wines, and he's a great character, and he'll tell you all about the wines. And then there's a little wine shop, which is run by a partnership, including Philippe. Philippe and I aren't the best of friends. He's never been particularly friendly to me. And I won't go into details, but there's nothing wrong with his wine knowledge. And I wouldn't like to put anybody off going in there because the quality of wines is very good. And I don't know whether they've opened again, but the cigar shop in St. James, they have a very good range of spirits. He's got a lot of very nice malt whiskies. But as I say, I guess he's probably opened again. He's legally allowed to do so. You've got to remember that none of the pubs can you just go in and have a drink this Christmas round here, because that's what Tier 2 means. You can have a substantial meal, but you can't have a drink. Can I recommend the Farmer's Arms in Coombe Flooring, where they try so hard to cater for people in this very difficult environment?
Absolutely, yeah. Perfect example of a local business that's got a great community around it as well, and lovely food. Also, we've got a question here or a point from Clive, who's asked, Martin, can you explain the percentages on the bottle, the 40% volume and 35.5% proof? Just a little bit about that.
Yes, I'll be delighted. This is one innovation from Europe, which I actually like. Before we had alcohol by volume, we had proof. And proof is the temperature at which gunpowder explodes. So 40% alcohol by volume means that of the alcohol, of that liquid, 40% is pure alcohol. You will never get a spirit that's pure alcohol, but some get close. Now, when we had proof, 70 degrees proof in the United Kingdom was equivalent to 40% alcohol by volume. But American proof is not the same as British proof. The Americans, for some peculiar reason, 80 degrees proof in America is 70 degrees proof in the UK. And the only advantage is if you take 50% of the American proof, that's alcohol by volume. But when you're talking about 40 as opposed to 35.5, 40% is the minimum strength that whiskey is allowed to be produced at. And in the European Union, many drinks now have to be 40% in line with that. I mean, cognac is typically 40%. But there are drinks that are a bit different to that. Some of the classic liqueurs are 40, but you might find one that's 38. And that's usually because the producer feels it's better at that strength. Now, yesterday I tasted 11 rums online. They'd sent me the samples, and I had a one-to-one session with a friend of mine who's the brand ambassador for one of the major rum brands, with the most wonderful ones from Barbados. Now, interestingly enough, some of the rums are higher than 40% because the producer feels they taste better at higher strengths. But he won't produce anything below 40. Now, that's not necessarily the case with all rums, but most will be 40%. So it's a question of taste. And you might find also, if you've got a very high strength spirit, say 60% cask strength, that's what it's come out of the cask at. You may want to add a few drops of water to cut it. Please, please, please use a very pure water. I use Highland Spring. Even filtered water, I can still smell chlorine. Chlorine will help to kill a drink. So my recommendation is use Highland Spring. For what it costs, it's amazing to use it for whiskey and indeed for tea. You'll get a longer finish on your tea if you're making it from tea leaves with Highland Spring water than you will with filtered water. I've done comparative tastings. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's a great tip, Martin. I think that's a good take home on that. I'm looking forward to testing these drinks with you once we come out of lockdown. We shall have to enjoy some cocktails, and there's going to be a few old parties. I'm just thinking, because obviously we're coming into like what would be normally the party season with Christmas parties and stuff. It's going to be a very different year.
It is.
It's going to be very, very strange, and I guess a big part of Christmas for lots of people, particularly if you're adults, is the party season, Christmas parties, etc. So it is very different. This we could expand upon this. We could do some live shows from various venues around Somerset, which would be great. And one of the things
that you and I have been talking about,
yeah, which would be great. And one of the things you mentioned at the start was the charity angle. We're very much looking to support. Was it Taunton Food Bank?
It's the Taunton Food Bank. Yes. Can I say a few words about it?
Of course you can.
Well, I put all the details on my Martin's Tasting Club Facebook page. So all the details there, their bank account details, and they've asked us to provide a reference, which I've put on there as well, so they know where the money's come from. I don't think they should be set in stone. I think Paul and I should review which charity we're going to support in the future. But I felt that certainly up until New Year, with all this lovely eating and drinking that we're going to have, we've got to remember the homeless. Now, the Taunton Food Bank is sponsored by the Trussell Trust. They're a national body. They are perfectly respectable, and the money is going to a most important cause, which is helping people here in Taunton. The money that you donate will not go to drugs, for example, because they won't give them cash, they will give them in kind. So they will get food and other needs. And that, I think, is very important. So I strongly urge you, if you like this, to donate something to the Taunton Food Bank.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. So we're just going to wrap up now. So next week, which cocktail are we looking at next week?
Next week, we're going for the Vodka Martini.
Oh, yes.
And I'll tell you the story of how it came about. But the Vodka Martini is almost unique. I don't know another cocktail where you would mix gin and vodka. You wouldn't normally want it. But that's what James Bond specified. And he also specified shaken, not stirred. And I suspect that's because he wanted it very, very cold. And I've shown you that this evening.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Martin. We'll catch up next week. Another great show. We look forward to people joining us next week. Just to wrap up now, I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, Paul. All the best.
There we go. So I hope you've had a good evening. Enjoyed it tonight. Please hit the like button on Martin's drinks page. Please spread the word. Invite your friends to like it, to encourage them to join in the fun and make some interesting cocktails from home, so that once we can get out to these venues across the local area, we can know which cocktails we like and which we don't. So we're all looking forward to once they reopen again. Look after yourselves. Please ask any questions on Martin's Facebook page, or join us next week where you can add your comments. Have a good evening and see you soon.